Disney Animation Studios is the original animation studios. Walt Disney and his team pretty much invented the medium back in 1937 when they created Snow White. In the decades since the color and spectacle of that film blew audiences away across the country, they've continued to create some of the most memorable and impactful stories that pretty much anyone has ever told anywhere, and they've fundamentally reshaped the way we as a society think about and engage with stories in the first place. But in that process, they have also created more than their fair share of real duds. So I thought that it was high time, given that this channel is all about analyzing story in every possible way, that we take a look at the entire canon of Disney animated films and rank them in an ultimate Disney animated film tier list. Oh my god, this is such a bad idea. I'm gonna get in so much trouble for this. Alright, you know what? You only live once. Who cares? Let's make a tier list! So 2 quick things I want to say right before we jump into the meat and potatoes. First off, standard disclaimer for tier lists. This is my tier list. It's entirely subjective. It's going to reflect my opinions and my biases. So if your favorite Disney movie is ranked lower than you think it should be, please let me know in the comments what that is and why. Or if you think something is too high and I'm an idiot for liking it so much, let me know that too. But the second thing is just to clarify that, as we do on this channel, we are going to be talking about the stories of these films. So I'm not going to be ranking them based on the quality of their animation or how great the music is. I will do my best to take off my own nostalgia goggles, but we're really going to just try to focus on the story in the film and how well that story is told and the implications or the impact that story had on the Disney studios itself or on culture more broadly. All right, so with all that said, let's jump into it. I was surprised when I began researching for this video to realize that there are 60 full feature-length Disney animated films. That is not counting Pixar, that's not counting shorts, that's not counting other formats. But that's a lot. I mean, you know it's a lot. Like, Disney's been around making films for a long time, but yeah, it's a lot. And including some movies that I thought were interesting because I kind of forgot they were Disney movies, which we'll get to as we go. To keep things somewhat organized, we're going to do this chronologically. We're going to start at the beginning and take each movie in the order that they were released. Partly just for organization's sake, but also because I think that then begins to tell kind of an interesting story of Disney Animation Studios itself as a creative agency and sort of the periods that they went through and some of the things that they were doing and how they were creating their stories and their movies in response to what had come before or what else was going on around them that I think is pretty interesting. So I've divided Disney's entire canon into 4 major eras, 4 major chronologies, the first of which I am calling the OG Disney films. These are the movies that were some of their first movies that came out in kind of a rapid succession when Disney was still kind of trying to figure out what it meant to be in animation studios. None of their films were a guaranteed success because everything was new and nothing was certain, and they were figuring stuff out as they went. Walt Disney himself was heavily involved in the creation of these movies, which had some pros and cons. But overall, it was a really interesting and creative time for the animation studios because they were trying out different things and starting to figure out like what their style and brand was. So we're going to start off with the absolute OG film, the one that started it all, Snow White. So Snow White, obviously, we've got to give it some props for being the first full feature-length animated film. But if we're just talking about the story, I've got to be honest, I'm going to put it in forgettable. Forgettable is the tier for films whose stories are, you wouldn't necessarily call them actively bad. They're just not even actively good either. And realistically, like, tell me the story of Snow White, like, specifically, not in super broad terms, but like, what even happens? I don't even remember, unless I went and watched it again right now, I don't actually even remember, like, why the evil stepmother, is she a princess? I think she is. Anyway, the story isn't really the point of what the Disney and the animators were trying to do with this film. They were trying to show that you could have this incredible medium, and the medium was really the vehicle for this movie. So yes, it was groundbreaking. Yes, in some ways the music and the medium still holds up, like the art is really evocative, but the story, honestly, I'm going to take a huge knock on any story whose puts their protagonist to sleep for a good portion of the story and just makes them sit around passively waiting for someone else to show up and save them. Yeah, not great storytelling. It doesn't get in the way, but it's not a huge asset. All right, that brings us to the second film in Disney's chronology, which is Pinocchio. And this just goes to show that you can have a real heavy focus on the animation and still tell a great story. Pinocchio is one of the greats. In my opinion, it's the best of all the original period films. The story has real stakes and relationships. It's a dual track stakes because it's both the relational stakes of like a family, Geppetto trying to create a family and Pinocchio trying to belong to a family, but there's like raw identity level questions being asked. What does it mean to be a human? What does it mean to be a real boy? Like that's big stuff, especially for, a cartoon, which a lot of this was considered at that time. The story has really good narrative movement. The scenes that it sets are really clear and defined. Like each one forms a really strong set piece, but then the movement between them makes sense. The pacing of it is really good. I'm not going to put it all the way. The top Let's Watch Right Now tier is for movies that I just have that has that extra thing for me personally that I would like. I'll drop everything and watch it anytime you want. I acknowledge how great Pinocchio is. It's not a personal favorite of mine. Partly because when I was a little kid, some of it kind of scared me, and so I didn't watch it a ton. But as a story and as a film, it's a massive success, and I think even more than Snow White, Pinocchio is the reason that Disney exists, because it was the way and the time that they showed that you can achieve art in animation, both in the animation and in the storytelling, and create something that has serious impact and relevance to the audience and to culture more broadly. So it's a really important movie and a really good movie. So we follow Pinocchio up with Dumbo. Dumbo, let's see. I can't, this is subjective. You may love it. I can't call it great, partly because it's a shorter movie. So I feel like there are some times where the pacing is a little off, and it felt, I don't know, Dumbo to me feels a bit of a rehash because, again, the core thrust of Dumbo is child separated from parent attempts to return to parents. So it's not really treading any super new ground. It was we have an animal protagonist, but that's kind of just a reskin. It's fine. I don't think it did as good of a job as Pinocchio of connecting its different set pieces. To me, it feels a little bit more like, here's this thing that happens, and then here's this other thing that happens, and the jump between them isn't always handled smoothly. It's fine. It's got a lot of good stuff. It's heartwarming. The scene at the end when he uses his big wings to fly, and that the core theme of like, even if you're strange, the thing that makes you strange or weird can be the very thing that is the best thing about you if you learn to embrace it. Okay, see, now I'm talking myself into... all right, you know what? Just because of that, just because the movie as a story does a really good job of grounding its central theme in metaphor, and the theme is one that I personally think is really important, I'm going to bump it up again and give it a slight nod. All right, we'll give it one of the greats because of the theme. Okay, well, we are ready for my first super hot take of this tier list because Bambi is dumpster tier. I do not like this movie as a story. Now, is the animation wonderful? Maybe, yeah, sure. If Bambi is one of your favorite Disney movies, I apologize, but what is the point of this story? Like, what does Bambi want? Like, yes, we all were super impacted, super blown away, too soon, by, his mom being killed. No spoilers, because it's been around for ages. And then he's sort of like, okay, but it's a story about a character who is on his own, just bumming around, and I guess kind of like making friends. What's the point of this story? Like, there's no antagonist, there's no stakes, there's no conflict, there's no agency. I find it extremely boring. other than the like, there's little micro moments where you think, okay, that's kind of interesting. Now here's a new character, but because there's no story question, there's no thrust of the narrative all the way through. There are really, it's almost not a story other than like vignettes and slice of life in a forest, which is just not my thing. Again, if you love Bambi, let me know why in the comments, but it is our first dumpster tier, in my personal opinion, as a story. Okay, so now we get to kind of an odd time in the Disney chronology where Walt Disney, it's actually kind of an interesting, if you want to look it up, Walt Disney had established enough relevance and enough notoriety that the American government actually sent him to Central and South America on sort of like a goodwill tour. I mean, it was a different time, I guess, right? And while he was there, he took a lot of inspiration from the things that he saw and the culture, and he made a series of films. And again, this period for Disney as a studio was all about experimenting and trying to figure out what worked. So they'd made these feature-length films, but they realized how much time and energy and work goes into making a big animated film. So they wanted to experiment with making shorter stuff, partly just to keep the lights on and make money, which is a creative challenge that all creatives have to struggle with. Like, how do you pay your bills? So they made a series of films, Saludos Amigos, Three Caballeros, Fun and Fancy Free, Melody Time, and Make Mine Music. Variations of short collections. Some are combinations of different stories, stories set to music. All of them, I'm just going to, for the sake of time, I'm going to group them all in the haven't seen it category, purely because I know I've seen snatches of stuff from this when I was a kid. I don't remember it well enough to have an informed opinion, but all of them are pretty light on story to begin with. And it was really, they're interesting from the point of view of experimentation in art and like someone trying to figure out what works for them. But I'm just going to save time by grouping them all here and moving on. I don't think when someone says, hey, what's your favorite Disney movie? I really don't think anybody's going to be like, oh, Melody Time, it's just the best. Like, yeah, it might have some fun stuff in it, but as a story, certainly not super relevant. And I will add the next movie in the list, Ichabod, The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad. Again, to haven't seen it, I have this vague recollection of maybe watching this in like elementary school during Halloween when my teacher was just tired of teaching and wanted to do an topically relevant video for the day. I don't remember it well enough. I know it technically has a story, and the story of Ichabod's Wild Ride, you know, from Washington Irving, like we could have a whole other conversation about Washington Irving's storytelling and the impact that had on America and American stories and American culture way back when. But the Disney reinterpretation, I don't have a lot of opinions on. So after that long detour into odd experiments, Disney gets back to their feature film career with Cinderella. Cinderella, I'm gonna say it's just fine. It's our first just fine. It's not bad by any means. It's not great. Cinderella as a protagonist is the primary critique I have of the story. She kind of just pines. And there's never really a point, like the clearest thing she wants doesn't come until much late, like towards the middle of the story when she decides she wants to go to the ball. But even that is never really particularly well defined why she wants to do that, other than like because it would be a nice change of pace from her crappy life. She's a really passive protagonist, and that personally for me is just never great storytelling, because it's not that hard to give your protagonist drive and agency within the frame of your story. Like, you can tell the Cinderella story with having Cinderella be a much more interesting protagonist than she is in this interpretation. I do really like a lot of the secondary characters, like the mice and the animal characters, but it's just this repeated cycle of like Cinderella feels vaguely bad about how her life is going, doesn't do anything about it, until her friends or her fairy godmother or somebody else shows up and they do something about it, and then the story progresses. So that loop, not my favorite, but at least it has like clear characters and clear stakes. We're watching someone's life, and we're clear that we're in this sort of like pivotal period in somebody's life, and we're gonna see whether it goes like more this way or more that way. one of the better, clearer antagonists that we've gotten in any Disney film so far. I mean, I guess Snow White had a clearer, but a lot, Bambi definitely doesn't. Dumbo doesn't really. Pinocchio doesn't really. They're more contextual conflict. Cinderella's stepmother is, I think, one of the first really memorable antagonists that Disney created, so I'll give it props for that and just leave it sort of in the fine category. Which brings us to the last film in the period that I have defined as sort of the OG collection period, which is Alice in Wonderland. Alice in Wonderland, what are we going to do with you, you crazy bag of potatoes? Okay, I'm gonna... Is it forgettable? Is it kind of... I think it's actually a little bad. It suffers from some of the same problems of Cinderella. At least, okay, so Alice has a motive, but it's basically just get home. And she got in trouble in the first place because she was just sort of bored and curious. Yeah, you can kind of tell what one of my big issues are with a protagonist. Give your protagonist something to care about and a reason to proceed through the story. I don't enjoy stories where the protagonist is just passively responding to a sequence of events, which that's all this story is. Alice gets herself into trouble by falling into Wonderland and then sort of wanders around. But they never, the story doesn't establish even really why she wants to get home, other than the generic concept that anyone should want to go home, but we know nothing about her home. In fact, the little inclinations that we get is that she's bored. There's nothing compelling about her return motive, and the scenes it has also some of the same problems of some of the other films where it's a sequence of very, very even more than normal disconnected moments and situations and sequences. Lewis Carroll's original book was groundbreaking because of the ways that it leaned into the chaos and the disorientation. I don't feel like that translated super well into a little bit less than 2-hour runtime movie without some of Carroll's great prose. And, and I'll be perfectly honest, the book Alice in Wonderland is not one of my favorite books either. So, yeah, again, subjectively speaking, it's not the worst ever, but I would go out of my way to not watch it if I had a choice to pick something else. So we're going to leave it here. So that actually brings us into the next of the 4 major eras that I've identified, which I'm calling classic Disney. This is the period where some of the experimentation of the OG period has kind of led to a little bit more coherence and consistency in filmmaking and storytelling. Disney's kind of figured out what it is and what it's trying to do. And also, this is the period, I think, where they began to realize that they couldn't just rely on the wonder of animation as a medium, because they'd done it enough and now other people had started doing it as well, and they really started leaning more into the story within the animation. So it produced, I think, some better results in some cases at least. So let's talk about that, starting first with Peter Pan. All right, Peter Pan, for me, it's at least here in the good stuff tier. This is the first of all the Disney movies that we've talked about that I have a personal connection with, one that I watched a lot as a kid, and it was one of the first that actually brought in some of that action swashbuckling dynamic that I, as a little boy, I really enjoyed. Some of the critiques I have with this film, the first one is it's a bit muddy in its cast roles. Who's the protagonist of this story? It's kind of Wendy, ultimately, because she's the one whose world is most disrupted and who then needs to go through a process of trying to solve the story question, which at least this movie does have a story question, which is, can the kids return from Neverland, or how will they return from Neverland? It's not Peter Pan, but the focus is heavily on Peter Pan. So it's just a bit disorienting in that way. You're never really exactly sure whose story this is. Which is a bit of a knock in my opinion. The other critique I would have is there's not a whole lot of clear change in order to engage with the goal of the story. I would have preferred it, if I was writing the story, I would have made Wendy and the boys more distinctively different at the beginning of the story than at the end. It's okay that Peter Pan doesn't change because that's kind of the nature of his character, and he's not the protagonist, so he doesn't really need to change. The whole concept of Peter Pan is he's the boy who never grew up, and I think with a few small changes to the script, you could make it a much better story, because you could partly make, in some ways, Peter is and can be the antagonist of the story, as the force that sort of opposes the questions and the need for growth that the primary characters are going through, where they're all needing to deal with and answer questions about if they are going to grow up, and if so, what kind of person are they going to grow up to be. Like, Hook is the obvious antagonist, but if you think about it from the narrative thrust, the central question of the book of the story is, like, you've got these characters who are on the cusp of going from children to young adults, and that's a scary and disorienting time and process, and Neverland kind of represents as a concept all of the different struggles of beginning to grow into an adult. That's really compelling story material, but none of it is really done in the movie version. It's just like they're just kind of like, Wendy is who she is, and Peter and the boys, Michael, the boys are who they are, and they don't really change much. It would have been a much better story if they grew and changed as characters and came home different from the way they left. I would have marked it higher. But it's got good drive, it's got good stakes, the scenes are wonderful, the conflict between, Peter and Captain Hook is one of the better hero-villain conflicts that we've gotten so far. So it's definitely got some good stuff. It's fun and worth watching, but I can't rank it any higher than this. All right, next up, another hot take, Lady and the Tramp. Gosh, I'll give it, I kind of want to put it here just because I don't personally like the movie very much. It's supposed to be a love story, and it's really the first real love story that Disney tried to tell. And it's sort of a, clash of societies conflict. All right, I'll give it that. Like, it tries to do some more ambitious things in some interesting ways, and it's fine. I don't like it personally because I think it's extremely slow, and given that it is a love story, I don't feel like I just don't love the actual characters of the tramp and the lady and the way that they engage. Like, I just don't buy it as much, personally. Maybe I just need to watch it again. It's been a long time since I've seen it, and maybe if I watched it more as an adult, I would have a better opinion of it. I just know that for me right now, in terms of my recollection of the movie and my feelings about it, I think this is about as high as I can put it. All right, Sleeping Beauty. Where are you, Sleeping Beauty? Oh boy. All right, so here's another one. You guys are probably gonna... I'm on the fence. Okay, again, emphasizing, I am trying to decide how to rank the story of Sleeping Beauty. As an animated movie, I think it's one of the best we've talked about so far. The animation style is more to my preference. The music is really cool. It suffers hugely from that same protagonist issue. Like, if Aurora is the protagonist, why doesn't she do anything? She falls asleep, and then we have Prince Philip he's not the protagonist. I guess it's a dual protagonist. Maleficent is also not a great antagonist because, like, why is she falls victim to the classic, I'm the antagonist because I'm bad, I'm the bad guy. Like, why? What does she want? Why is she the bad guy? We know nothing about any of that, really. There's this implication that within the fairy world and the three good fairies and her, that maybe they could have played on that a little bit more. I don't know. I feel like this is a movie that is fun to watch, but is not a great story. It's not terrible. I'll put it here. It's forgettable. It's not bad. It's just very bland as a story. So I'll put it here. Which leads us to our very first, I will watch this with you anytime you want, call me and we'll do it. 101 Dalmatians, proof that you can make a animal/dog movie and still have it be a great story. This is a great story. It's a story about, like, we have clear protagonists, we have clear conflict and immediate, very quickly established stakes, and the stakes matter. The theme is all about finding your family and fighting for family. Like, that's great. I mean, so here you've got great animation, great music, and all the things of the animated movie, but they've paired it with just a really excellent story with really some of the best pacing in a movie we've reviewed so far in this tier list. This, like, none of the scenes outstay their welcome, but you also don't move through them too fast and get confused about where you are and what's going on, which is especially impressive, by the way, considering the fact that this is a travelogue, so they move through a lot of setting. It's not just in one place at one time. Like, they move around a lot, but you're never confused about where they are. Cruella de Vil, I think, one of the better villains, really, so far, anywhere in any of these films. Like, she's extremely memorable and scary, and like, but they also give her at least some sense of justification or reason. Like, she's not entirely just bad. She's vain, she's selfish, she's egotistical, and, you know, later adaptations of 101 Dalmatians have picked up on those threads and developed them a little more clearly, but the roots of it are there for her as a protagonist, and the conflict between the dog character leads, Pongo and Perdita, and then, you know, the human characters. I'm glad that they really leaned into, like, the human characters are kind of window dressing, like their supporting cast. I just think it's great, it's fun, it's heartwarming, it's got some really wonderful set-piece moments, and I would watch it pretty much any time, and I do watch it on the regular because my daughters love dogs, so this is a classic in our house already. Alright, so next up we've got Sword in the Stone. I remember thinking this was really cool, but it has been so long since I've seen it. I'm gonna put it in the haven't seen it tier towards the top, just because I don't really feel fully qualified to talk about and review and rank the story. I have positive associations with it, but it's been so long, so maybe I just need to put it on my watch list. But I'm just going to say I haven't seen it for now because I don't feel fully comfortable, you know, levering an opinion about it. Next up is Jungle Book. This one's fine. Disney has learned some lessons by now. The protagonist, Mowgli, it's clear who the protagonist is. It's clear what the central story question is, and it's introduced quickly. Like, we get this good, short, little lead-in. But then the story question of, will Mowgli need to be returned to man, or can he stay and live in the jungle? And essentially, like, who is he going to be? That core identity question is what's on the table through the movie. It's impressive to me that, given that the source material is literally a collection of short stories, the story of Jungle Book feels more coherent than other movies they have done that really could have been more coherent, but still felt more like disconnected scenes. This was written as disconnected scenes, and yet it feels more coherent. So, yeah, you know what? I'm talking myself into it. I'll bump it up a little bit. It's pretty good. As a story, it's pretty good. His relationship with his two mentors, and the fact that each, you know, Bagheera and Baloo kind of represent different takes on the central question of the story and different possibilities for him and how he grows. And yeah, it's good. It's got a good, clear antagonist looming in the background. It represents, like, the danger of the jungle. Yeah, we'll leave it here. It's fine. Next up is Aristocats. Aristocats, okay, hear me out on this. Aristocats is just Walmart 101 Dalmatians. So I have to rank the story down. It's fine to watch, but it is the exact same concept as 101 Dalmatians. We have a family of animals living in a human world. The animals have a problem that is introduced into their life, and they go on a journey to try to solve it. But where 101 Dalmatians was all about family and trying, like, the motive of the drive of the protagonist was to save their kids. This one, it's like the super posh, spoiled family of cats is sad because they now are out in the country and they don't have their super cushy lifestyle anymore, and they're trying to get back home so that they can get away from all the poor people. Like, it's got some problems in the sense of, like, I just don't care that much about their reason. Like, they have clear motive, they have clear drive, I just don't care about it. Because it's like, oh, I'm sorry for you. Like, you immediately find some friends who would be happy to, like, take you in, and, like, you're kind of, it's not that bad, really, other than, like, you want to get back to your mansion. And, yeah, it's like, it's all the same elements of 101 Dalmatians, but not done as well. So I'm going to rank it down here, because it doesn't tread any new ground, and the ground that it does tread, it doesn't do as well as what's been done before. Man, it is surprising to me how many of these movies I have seen and remember. Apparently, I've watched a lot of Disney films in my lifetime. Okay, next up. Oh, geez. Okay, Robin Hood. This is the hardest ranking I have had to do so far because the split between my nostalgia goggles, hindsight is 20 is all a blur, rosy happiness of what this movie meant to me when I was a kid, and my actual take on the storytelling is a bit at odds. I loved the movie as a kid. I've seen it so many times. It's an action adventure, and I was really hungry for action adventure Disney movies. So in that sense, I loved it. It suffers from some serious pacing issues. It is way too slow in a lot of places. I tried to watch it with my girls, and they were so bored so often because the scenes just... within the scenes, it moves really slow, and then the scenes stay for longer than they should. There's some serious pacing problems. At least, I will say this, at least this is a story with a really clear protagonist who has an agenda, although even there, I have to say, the root of the Robin Hood story and his motive for why he is doing what he is doing is not present in this story. Robin is doing good stuff because he's hero guy in this telling of the story, and there's never really any justification given for why he's hero guy or why he opposes Prince John other than because he has to, because he's the hero. Like, it's kind of weak, to be honest. Okay, here's what we're gonna do. I'll leave it here in just fine. I cannot, my heart wouldn't handle it to rank it any lower than this, but it has some serious problems as... like, if you just purely look at the story and the way it is told across the course of the film, it has some issues. So we're just going to leave it right in the middle. Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh. This is a real different one from all the other ones. I'm not sure how to rank it. If I look at it not compared to other Disney movies, but just as what it is, which is the adaptation of this. But see, here's the thing. What's the story of Winnie the Pooh? I know I've seen it. I watched it as a kid a fair amount, as much as a lot of these other ones. I couldn't tell you the story. I know there's heffalumps and woozles at some point, and he gets stuck in a tree. I can't... Okay, we're going to say forgettable. If you've seen it more recently, maybe if you have kids and they love it, let me know what you think it should be. Because I literally can't remember the story as I'm trying to, we're going to put it here in forgettable as a story. I think it's cute. I think all the other elements, but we're not really ranking those things. So purely from a story standpoint, we're going to leave it here. Okay, The Rescuers. This is an interesting one. So don't yell at me. I think I have to rank it as a bit bad. To be honest, the story isn't the strongest. And here's the main issue, and you've heard me bring this up over and over again. There's serious protagonist confusion. The mice characters, Bianca and Bernard, are the protagonists, but the movie kind of wants to treat the little girl, and for the life of me, I cannot remember her name. Is it Penny? I don't remember. As the protagonist, and like... the stakes are there because they're trying to rescue. It's muddy. It's just a muddy movie with also some pacing issues. The story is not told quite as well or as clearly as it could have been. The concept is really cool, and that concept gets paid off much better in the sequel. So when we get to Rescuers Down Under, we'll talk about how the contrast between the two makes me feel more confident about why I'm going to keep this one here. All right, Fox and the Hound, our next dumpster tier. Gosh, it is hard for me to explain how much I dislike this movie. It is sad, it is boring, it is super slow-paced. It's meant to be a sort of opposites can't be friends, can they be friends? But the tension of the drive, like, again, it suffers again from that, like, why am I watching this story? Because there's lots of just moments of stuff that's happening that maybe is relevant, but like, what's the narrative agency here? It's never really established. You don't really get to the conflict of like the two of them being at odds because of who they are until much later in the story, if you've even watched it that far. Yeah, it's just not one of my favorites. I can't give it a high ranking. I think it's just bad. All right, Black Cauldron. Jeez. Okay, so I want to give this movie a better ranking because I celebrate the fact that Disney was trying to be a little edgier, was trying to grow up a little bit in some ways. And I actually think there are some things that this movie tried to do that seeded some of the better quality stories and movies from much later on in Disney's catalog. But it has some serious issues, similar to a lot of the other issues that from this period. Like, in this classic Disney thing, Disney was really had not settled, frankly, just good storytelling practices. Yeah, I'll put it here. This may be one of those where, like, this is suffering in its ranking from the fact that, like, my grandma really didn't like the dark magic overtones, and I didn't get to watch this that much when I was a kid, when I was growing up. So maybe if I had watched it more, I would rank it a little higher. I know I've seen it. I feel like more than just forgettable, like, or yeah, all right, we'll give it forgettable because I can't think to tell you stuff about it that is really distinctive or great. Oh, okay, man. Here we come to this. Okay, we've just come to the first movie in this whole ranking that I literally want to stop the tier list and go watch it right now. The Great Mouse Detective is a freaking fantastic film. I love it. It's a detective story that's actually told quite well. Like, the plot of Ratigan is actually, like, you don't know it, especially as a kid. Like, you're following with Basil as he's trying to solve a mystery, and mysteries are not that easy to do. Like, if you either make the plot too hard to follow, or you bring in elements way at the end that the reader couldn't have followed along to solve it, or you make it super obvious. And this threads that line really well. Like, you have a great character, kind of like father-daughter, maybe sort of dynamic between Basil and Olivia, and that relationship really changes him. Like, this is one of the best protagonist arcs that I'm going to say it's the best protagonist arc that Disney has told so far in any of these films, because Basil starts out kind of a jerk and a recluse, and he has some serious flaws that he grows through and overcomes throughout the course of the movie, and who he is at the end of the story is noticeably different because of what he's gone through, the way he relates to Watson. Like, he has a realization moment towards the end where he realizes what he's been doing wrong and how he needs to change, and then he does. Like, it's so good as literally just as a story. I mean, yes, the movie is really fun as well. I like the way, the interpretation of London and all the other, like, the reinterpretation of the Sherlock Holmes thing into animals. I thought they handled that well, but as a story, it has stakes and clear drive right from the beginning. Because they show you her father being kidnapped, and then she needs her father back, and then it grows into a larger plot that has high stakes because it's the fate of the entire kingdom, and his like personal and professional identity is on the line. Like, it is just excellent. I love it. It just goes. It's like, this is what proves that Disney can make great stories and great animation films, and I would watch it anytime, day or night. And then from the lofty heights of Great Mouse Detective as an animal story, we drop down to Oliver and Company. It's one of these two. It's not a great... Which is weird because, like, the story of... Like, this Great Mouse Detective... Like, yes, they're pulling from source material, but it's an entirely original story. Oliver and Company is just Oliver. But made worse by... They were trying so hard to be hip and, like, modernize the story, but they do it in ways that just make it confusing. The cast of characters is a little too big, but pointless. Like, why are they all here? What role do they serve? Again, Oliver's, like, what's his thing? That they don't really give you a clear... He's just kind of running around and stuff. I'll just say it's... I don't have clear enough critiques to actually call it dumpster tier, so we're going to call it just bad. It's just not a great story. The way that it's delivered, some of the songs are fun, but, like, that's, again, not really what we're talking about. So yeah, this one's just a bit bad. Which is a bit of a bummer note to leave the classic era Disney behind, but the good news is we now get to move into the third of the Disney eras, which I am calling peak Disney. So we had OG Disney, where Disney invented a whole medium and was trying to figure out what to do with it, and now we've just gone through classic Disney, where they're kind of like, it's very peaks and valleys. Like, some were great, Some were not so great, and it was really uneven. Now we move into peak Disney. Disney has, like, they've gone through enough iterations, and I do actually think that in some ways, this is going to sound bad, having Walt Disney no longer in the picture and so invested in the creative control, like, he's the one that originated everything, but Disney as an animation studios couldn't fully flourish while it was really kind of such a one-man show. And it was the period after he passed away that where there was a kind of a lost in the wilderness period where some of these really uneven stories came out of. But that was sort of also a building and reorganization process that led to some of the best, many people would say most of the best Disney movies that Disney has created, all then within a period of time that we're about to move into. So let's kick that off. Shoot, so I just realized right before we dove into that, I didn't actually rank Fantasia back when it was supposed to be, because it's a much older thing. But I'm going to say that that's fine, because it's not really a story. Like, it's music, and this was the hallmark of their demonstration of what was possible with animation. I'm going to put it here, even though there's not, it's like story told to music, and the story is these various scenes. But it is such an incredible hallmark of a thing that they made. It would make me feel weird to rank it any lower than this, but there's not much to talk about story-wise. And then Fantasia 2000, I actually, you know what? To be honest, I don't think I've even seen it. So, whatever. I haven't seen it. Maybe it's awesome. I doubt it's as good as the original one, but maybe it's cool. You let me know in the comments. Is Fantasia 2000 worth watching? Again, it's not a story, so we're going to move on. Okay, you guys, are you ready for this? The time for my probably most contentious hot take of the entire tier list. Please do not flame me and blow up my computer with your hate mail. Little Mermaid is not a good story. All right, bear with me. Again, is the animation great? Of course it is. Are the songs great? Yeah, I love the music in this movie. It's probably the best music so far on this whole list. But let's talk about the story for a moment. I cannot stand Ariel as a protagonist. I'm sorry. Like, her whole motive, the entire movie, the entire story is driven by the idea that a teenager saw a guy from a distance one time and was so convinced that she was in love with him that she needed to run off and, like, completely upend her entire life and make this weird, like, deal with the devil. And they cast the dad as the bad guy, but, like, he's not wrong. Like, humans are scary and dangerous, and she just saw this guy. Like, I understand. He's overprotective, and yes, he overreacts. The primary conflict, the inciting incident that really kicks this off, is it that she sees Eric, or is it really I think the inciting incident is when the dad trashes her little treasure cave. Was he overreacting? 100%. But, like, that this story falls victim to the, like, all of this could have been solved if you had just had a sane conversation instead of both of you being psychos. It's hard to care about stakes like that. Future Justin here with a quick interruption because I realized as I was editing the video that I didn't do the best job explaining my main critique of Ariel as a protagonist. It's fine to have a protagonist who wants more and is curious and is sort of like looking outward to the world. Beauty and the Beast is a great example of exactly that. That's really Belle's primary motivation. But in that story, they knew enough to give an external challenge or an external conflict that forces her out of her normal world and into the larger challenge and adventure of the story itself. Because her father is kidnapped by the Beast and she finds out about it, she sets off to try to save him and eventually, like, puts herself in his place. That's really compelling, and it's understandable why she would take such a big leap out of her normal life and into this kind of dangerous adventure. Ariel doesn't have that. She is, at the beginning we get some little hints of her boredom or her dissatisfaction or her curiosity or whatever. If I was writing the story, I would have worked harder to make sure that there was some element in the story where she needed to go to the surface world for reasons that weren't just purely selfish or self-centered. Like, put the solution to a problem back home in the surface world, and then that gives her a reason to need to set off to recover it
Yes, of course, is that difficult? Sure, it's difficult, but it's work that's worthwhile, because in the absence of that, I just find it extremely hard to get behind her motive as a character, and why she's compelled to make such extreme choices in response to what are really kind of minor things. Like, there's no reason for her to do the things that she does that propels the story forward, but there could have been reasons. Remember that when it comes to the narrative, every element is a choice. And so the fact that they never bothered to fill in a more compelling backstory for Ariel, or a more compelling inciting incident or motivation for her to go and pursue this dangerous course of action, just for me, it's an inescapable flaw in the storytelling that makes it really hard to get behind pretty much everything else that happens after that point, which is most of the rest of the story.
Then you have the other problem with the second half of the movie. The entire implication of the second half of the movie is that you don't need to talk to find love. You just need to, like, smile. I get, there's so many things about it that bug me. Yeah, it is not my story. It's not my movie. If you love The Little Mermaid and it's one of your favorites, and I know it is for a lot of people, and like mermaids, I get it. Mermaids are cool. As a subjective ranking, this is my... it doesn't help, by the way, that this was one of the first movies that I saw in theaters as a kid. I think I was like 5 or 6, and it gave me the very first horrible nightmares that I can remember. Like, for a couple of nights, for a while, after we watched this movie, I had terrible nightmares as a kid. And yeah, so maybe that's why I don't like it, because it gave me nightmares. So there you go, Little Mermaid. Time for my revenge. You get dumpster tier. All right, from that a bit of a downer note, we get to Rescuers Down Under. Yay! I love this movie so much. All right, so this was what I was alluding to before when we talked about Rescuers. As a concept is good, but there were a lot of problems with the way this particular version of the story was being told that were pretty much universally fixed. Here in The Rescuers Down Under, we have a really clear focus on Bernard and Bianca, and I actually love that they made them clearly the protagonist, and they gave them, and Bernard, really, of all of them, he's the protagonist, and we get some actual character change. Yay! He starts out mousy, see what I did there, and, shy and totally lacking in confidence, and then they get this mission to go save this boy, and thankfully in this story they were clear that, like, the boy is not the point. He's the goal, not the hero, and he's just there, which is fine. That's the role he should fill, because then the protagonists get to go on this difficult adventure and tackle the stakes. But I love how there's this dual plot thread dynamic where, like, obviously the external plot of the story is, can they save the boy? But the internal plot, the real drive of the story is, can Bernard grow enough as a character to gain the confidence that he needs to confess his love for Bianca and, like, become the mouse he was meant to be? Like, that's just great. That's great story material. And they do it super well. They bring in the sort of contrast character of the Aussie mouse. I can't remember his name at the moment, but the really fun, the guy who was clearly modeled off of Paul Hogan in Crocodile Dundee, which makes me love it even more. They have a lot of fun playing with the Australia Down Under thing. The supporting cast and the comedic moments are perfectly pitched. Like, they're funny, but they don't become the point of the movie and take away from the movie. It's just a great film. I really like it. It's heartwarming. It's well told. It's well paced. It's just good. I'll watch it anytime. All right. Beauty and the Beast. Total dumpster. No, I'm just kidding. Of course it's not. Don't turn away. Don't kill me. It's not. I'm going to put it here in one of the greats. My sister would kill me if I put it anywhere lower than this. It's absolutely her favorite Disney movie, so shout out to my lovely sister and her abiding love of Beauty and the Beast. It's phenomenal. For me personally, the only reason I'm not putting it right here, I'll watch it. It's a great movie. It didn't quite connect with me personally enough for it to go into the, like, extreme personal attachment level. But one of the greats is basically the, like, all the movies that I acknowledge are excellent, I just don't have quite that same level of personal nostalgic attachment. This is the best love story that Disney has made, maybe ever, but certainly up to now. They finally really got it right. They finally got the idea that a love story is primarily about the ways that the gap between two characters causes growth in both characters, and the tension or the conflict isn't, we have these external things, but the real conflict of a love story is the dynamic between the characters, and we are invested because we are dying to see if they will grow and how they will grow to the point where their love becomes possible in a way that we're clear it's not possible at the beginning of the story. Like, that's what makes a great love story, and they totally nailed it with Beauty and the Beast. Like, it's baked right into the concept of the film. He is literally a magically transformed beast whose appearance, reflects his inner darkness, and can she save him? But they don't, like, they made Belle is one of the best protagonists that we've gotten so far in a Disney film, because they gave her moxie and independence, and, like, she is an example of a character who is driven by wanting something more. Like, that's the whole first song of the movie. That is done well. Like, we buy it, we care. They spend enough time showing us what her life is like before and why she feels that way, that we're rooting for her too. Like, we want her to have something more because we're clear that she's unfulfilled, and that she has that sense that there's more out there in the world, and we want that for her. And she's smart enough, and has enough agency and drive and like conviction in what she wants to kind of set off and do what she needs to do. She goes off to, like, the inciting incident, the reason she's captured is, like, she not only goes off to save her father because she cares about him and isn't waiting around for someone else to solve the problem, but then she sacrifices herself in his place. Like, come on, she's a great protagonist that solves a lot of the issues that a lot of other Disney protagonists have had up until this point. So yes, it's an excellent story. The pacing of it is perfect. It just so happens the music and the animation are gorgeous as well. But just purely on its own from a story standpoint, it's one of the best. All right, Aladdin. I will watch this all the time. This is, in some ways, I think, the first Disney movie that really got comedy right. Which, how can you go wrong when you basically just put Robin Williams in a room and tell him to talk and be funny? Yes, of course they got comedy right, but they interwove it into the story. And this is also one of the first where Disney was explicitly trying to be relevant, as in modern, like the way that, like, the jokes and the context of the story were very modern and relevant. Again, at the time it was made, obviously now it's quite a bit old, revealing my age, because this came out when I was a kid. Yes, does it have some, like, cultural representation problems? Yeah, for sure. A lot of old Disney movies do, because a lot of stuff from that period does, and we've thankfully grown a bit as a society. And the story itself is fun. It's one of the better, like, here you go. You've got a protagonist with a clear drive. It's clear he wants a better life for himself. He's skilled. He's got agency. He does stuff. He doesn't sit around waiting for stuff to be done for him. Aladdin's a good protagonist. Even if I was inclined to put it here, my nostalgic attachment to how much I loved this movie as a kid and how many times I have seen it and would watch it happily again, clearly going to put it up here in the watch it right now category. Which brings us to The Lion King. Same deal. Man, this is a good story. Obviously, it's an interesting evolution in Disney's filmmaking capacity. The animation and the scope of this movie was very groundbreaking, but even without those elements, and the music was great and all the other, the story is awesome. One of the better versions of character motive. Like, you have young Simba, who is partly responsible for his father being killed, and but at the very least he thinks he's fully responsible for it, who goes off and exiles himself and is totally lost, and then has to go through a process of reclaiming his identity. Like, I love identity rooted stories. That, for me personally, I'm always a sucker for that. The pace of it is great. The supporting cast is great. The movement and agency of all of it is it's just really extreme. This is peak Disney, for obvious reasons. I mean, I don't think anybody's going to argue with me that Lion King is one of the better Disney movies ever made. Oh, now we get to Pocahontas. Not one of my favorites, I'll be honest. Yeah, this movie's it's confused. I feel like when they were making Pocahontas, they couldn't decide how light or heavy they wanted it to be. The themes are certainly very heavy, But it's almost like they were afraid of that, and so they overcompensated by like too much goofiness in times and ways where it didn't work. It's meant to be a love story, but it's not a very good love story because again, I feel like they were really... I think Disney was just freaked out by the fact that they're telling a story that is rooted in real history as opposed to a pure fantasy like Beauty and the Beast. And so the implications of the love story dynamic between two actual humans who really existed, I feel like they just didn't know what to do with this movie, with the story as they were telling it. They didn't know where they wanted to fall on how to present Native Americans and colonialism, and like these are tough topics and heavy topics, and I don't feel like this movie does a great job with them. So I'm gonna say it's not the worst ever. It has some redeeming qualities, but this is as high as I can put it. Hunchback of Notre Dame. Okay, personal. First glance, what do I think? It's fine. It's fine. Is it fine? Is it forgettable? Yeah. I've seen it a couple times. I know the story, but partly I know the story from the Dumas version, so Quasimodo is a compelling enough protagonist. I really don't... The ending is such a downer, though, and not, like, in a fully necessary way. It's fine. I could see why you would like it. If you really like it, I could totally understand the reasons why you really like it. I don't personally love it, but there's nothing about it that I can super critique either. Like, it's fine. So yeah, this is a good one to put in. It's fine. Oh, Hercules, my man. Top tier. I love this movie so much. And look, I'm not even going to argue that it's the best Disney movie. I just like it a lot. It's really fun. You know, you're going to notice, again, as a bias, like when I was a little boy growing up, I leaned towards the movies that had a little bit more action. You'll notice, like, if there was a sword in the movie, I probably liked it. So yeah, personal bias revealed there, but it's also just, it's a really, really, really good story. One of the better versions of Disney trying to tell a thematically rooted story, the core theme of what makes someone a hero, which is interesting given that this movie pretty much falls right in the middle of Disney storytelling. Like, it's about halfway through between where they started and where we are now. So it's interesting that to me, about the middle of that journey, right about now, when they've got a lot of movies under their belt, that they start asking, so wait a minute, what is a hero? Like, what makes a hero? What makes a character great? And Hercules has to go through wrestling with that question. And, you know, their answer is, it's interesting, like the answer to the question that they give, what makes a character great is not his strength, or essentially it's not his heroicness, like his heroic role. It's what's inside of them and the choices they make about who they decide to be and how they decide to treat other people. The answer to the question here in Hercules, in a lot of ways, this sets the stage for Frozen and how Frozen was such a big breakout, which we'll talk about when we get there. But like the questions that Disney began asking in this film set the stage for all the better films when they like got their mojo back after the dark times, which we'll get to. So yeah, it's a great story. It's fun. The action is done well. The pacing of it moves really well. The stakes and the antagonist, like Hades, is great. I love that this is one of the earliest examples I can think of. Like in The Lion King, Scar is an antagonist who's a bad guy and has bad intentions. They never really explain why. They just show you that he is this way. Hades is the same deal, but they give you a rationale for it. Like, he's jealous and jilted and kind of like, he's very clear. Like, I'm kind of pissed that, like, you guys are all up here doing your thing. You stuck me with this crap job and nobody is nice to me. Like, he's yeah, like, his motives are kind of understandable, which you want in a good antagonist, and they got that in this. So Hades is a great antagonist, Hercules is a great villain, Meg is a fun, sassy, love interest alternate foil for Hercules. Like, she's so world-oriented, and he's so naive, and, like, that does the love dynamic really well. Like, their relationship makes sense because they start out so different, and then their differences prompt growth and change in each other in ways that make sense and that we get behind, so that by the time they're together at the end, we get why they're together at the end. Like, all the elements of it, I think, are just done super, super well. I will watch it all the time, and I think it's great. All right, Mulan. I'm going to put this one here in one of the greats. It's, again, they're on such a roll right now. You'll notice it's like boom, 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 boom. Excellent, excellent, excellent. Small dip, but still excellent. Because this is the point where Disney really hit its stride. It had figured out the animation dynamics, but it finally paired those with like really good storytelling. Mulan is a great coming of age story, finding your place in the world, deciding who you're gonna be. You'll notice that Disney kind of has some themes that they tend to repeat over and over again, but you know what? All artists have repetition of the themes they care about. Mulan is kind of like Hercules over again, but it treads new ground, and it deals with some different thematic issues. It's not, I'm not gonna say it's one of my all-time favorites. It leans a little bit further into the slapstick goofiness than I prefer. But it's great. It's great. I like it. I'll always watch it. I was split on where to put it exactly. But I do think for me, I'll put it here. It's definitely one of the greats. Yeah, it's a good movie. And finally, Tarzan. Super underrated film. This one doesn't get, I feel like, the recognition or credit that it deserves. I feel like it gets overlooked. All right, I know we're not talking about music, but good Lord, Phil Collins' soundtrack slaps for this. Like, why? How did that happen? They were like, Phil, just write some music for this movie, and he comes out with this incredibly epic score. Like, this is one of the only Disney soundtracks that I got it on CD, and I just listened to it as music because it's that good. Okay, but that aside, the story is really good. It's the sort of a caught between two worlds dynamic where Tarzan is, again, wrestling with identity and who he's going to be and where he belongs. And it would have been, it's really challenging because on the one hand, you have all the animal characters and the ways that he can communicate with them. And then you have the human characters. They bridge that gap really well. Like, it could have been a lot more confusing than it was. But they basically just treated them all as characters. Yeah, it's just really, really good. It's really good. It's a great story, and I think it deserves a lot more credit than it gets. When I first started working on this tier list, I was aiming for about an hour of a video, and clearly I should have known better because we're already there. So in the interest of sanity, I'm going to split this into 2 parts. But this is a really perfect time to split because we've just finished up the first major Disney eras and are about to move into a pretty interesting one where we'll get to see what happens when Disney has to wrestle with its first major competition as the Pixar Studios movies burst onto the scene and some of the challenges that clearly starts to create for them. So if you've reached the end of the video, I'm going to assume that you've been enjoying it as much as I have been enjoying making it. So please take a second to hit the like button to help it spread to more people, subscribe to the channel for more content like this, and definitely make sure you watch part 2 for more extreme story nerding and quite a few more hot takes, which I think you may or may not agree with.